Ukrainian authorities say at least 11 people have been killed after Russian forces fired more than 30 missiles at targets right across Ukraine. Officials told residents to remain in shelters. Authorities say 15 of the drones were downed around the capital, Kyiv. The city's mayor says the new violence left residents angry and ready to fight. I spoke earlier to Kyiv's Mayor Vitali Klitschko and asked him how bad the Russian attacks on his city were.
Last night was not easy night because Russians sent kamikaze drone to our hometown, to Ukraine, and thanks our anti-rocket systems, our military forces, we shut down actually all drones, and we doesn't have damages in our hometown. And today morning, the next attack was rocket attack. It actually was 3-4 hours people spent in underground, in subway, in shelters, and also thanks to our military forces, they shoot down almost every rockets which Russians sent to our hometown.
The point of these strikes is to break the Ukrainian people in the middle of winter. More attacks on infrastructure today. I ask you, are the Russians getting any closer to weakening Ukrainians' resolve?
The Russians try to destroy our infrastructure. Right now it's snowing outside, temperature is pretty cold, and the target it's critical infrastructure. The Russian forces try to freezing civilians in our hometown, try to make huge damages and destroy normal life of civilian, and to make a house, to try to bring the depressive mood to everyone, our citizens. Instead, the people were angry and ready to fight. Listen, I like a great saying. Our citizens told, better without electricity and water than with Russians. And we're still fighting for our independence, for our freedom. And that's why the Russians, that's why we have a lot of courage. And we thank you all one more time for support of our friends to anti-rocket system, to modern defensive weapons. It's very helpful to Ukraine, to our forces, and every rockets and every kamikaze drone was shut down tonight.
And speaking of that support, the attack comes the day after Germany and the US announced they would send high-tech battle tanks to Ukraine. Russia called the decision extremely dangerous, warning it would take this conflict to a, quote, new level of confrontation. What's your reaction?
Russians understand just strong and power position. And Russians, yes, of course, they're very unhappy with modern weapons, with the tanks, and it's dangerous for Russian forces. We defend our homeland. We want to kick out every Russian soldier from our territory, and that's why we're fighting for our territorial integrity. And yes, of course, Russians is very nervous about that, but they starting the war. And impact from modern weapons, they're afraid from that.
Are you worried these tanks are coming too late, that the Russian forces are now dug into their positions to an extent that they will be too hard to move?
Yes, of course. We're talking about support pretty long time. And actually, I was very happy. I just came back from Davos, and right now I don't need to explain to decision maker, to many politicians, how war situation. It's not a war, it's genocide, it's terrorism, what doing Russian forces. And right now, actually, everyone in the world see a true face of this invasion, of this war, and where died thousands and thousands civilians, destroy the cities and villages, and it's drama for millions of people in Ukraine. And yes, of course, it's very important to in the battle. It's very important the will to win. It's very important the spirit, but it's also very important modern weapons. And we defend right now our homes, our country, and please don't forget, we defend not just our homes. We defend also the same values. European, modern, democratic values, and we defend the European country, because I'm more than sure the Russians go so far as far we are allowed to go, and we listen voices from Moscow. They talking about Poland. They're talking about the Baltic countries, and Putin presents himself as a collector of former territory of Russian Empire. They want to rebuild the Russian Empire. And I want to repeat one more. We don't want back to USSR. We don't want to be the part of Russian Empire. Our goal to be the part of European family as democratic modern country.
And that's a case you no doubt made to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. There was a lot of criticism in the past weeks here in Germany and around the world of Mr. Scholz's handling of the tank deliveries. Many saw him dithering, too hesitant and too slow. Do you agree with that criticism, or do you sympathise with his position?
I like German's word. Ende is good, all is good. By the way, the Bundeskanzler take a decision to deliver tanks, and we want to say thank you very much. Yes, of course, a lot of criticism. It's too slow, much too slow, and we need the weapons, because we pay for our independence right now with biggest life of our soldier, life of our citizens, and that's why we need to defend our homeland, and with modern weapons we can do it that much easily.
This week marked 11 months since Russia launched its war on Ukraine, a war that started with the attempt to seize Kyiv. Nearly a year later, your city and your country is still standing, much of it, though, left in ruins. What are your thoughts when you think back to that day, February the 24th, 2022, and where do you see Ukraine going from here?
We actually received a lot of information from our partners. The Russians prepared to invasion, but we actually can realize it's a modern war, the middle of Europe, the Russians starting the war. And actually a year ago, everybody was shocked, and many experts in the world give to us just a couple of days or a couple of weeks. And we Ukrainians we actually shocked the whole world with our performance, how tough our soldiers defend our homeland. And right now, already 1 year we're defending and successfully defending our homes, our countries from Russian army, one of the strongest army in the world. And our patriots show the great spirit and will to win, because we're defending our families, children, and we're ready to die for our future. And Russians fighting right now for the money. And we motivated pretty well. And we spent a lot of time to take support from all countries in the world, and to deliver a great message. We're defending not just our homes, we're defending also European countries. And Russians broke all international rules. And actually, right now, everyone in the world understand what's going on. It will be biggest mistake to think the war far away from you. It's far away. It's the war somewhere in Ukraine, far away from your home. Ukraine is one of the largest countries in Europe, and it's one of the largest countries needs stability, and because instability in Ukraine can bring instability in the whole region, and that's why it's life important to hold Europe, to bring peace back to Europe, to Europe, bring peace back to Ukraine. Life important. And also this war can touch everyone in the world, because please don't forget, we have 5 nuclear plants, and one of the biggest in Europe, in Zaporizhzhia, was the fire. If will be explosion, it will be touched every human in our planet. And that's why it's very important to be proactive, to do it everything is possible to stop this war. And we're fighting for that, and we're thankful for everyone who support Ukraine. It's life important, not for us, it's also very important to everyone in modern world. No war, we need a peace.
Vitali Klitschko, Mayor of the city of Kyiv, thank you so much for your time today, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Now, the attacks come a day after Germany and the United States announced plans to supply Ukraine with modern battle tanks, with Berlin adding its aim was to have the first company in Ukraine by the end of March. The additional weapons for Ukraine could play a vital role in Kyiv's efforts to repel the Russian invasion. But Russia is showing no sign of backing down. Analysts say it's laying the groundwork for a new offensive in the spring. Here's a look at some of the weaponry Russia has at its disposal.
Since the end of World War II, Russia has held the title as the second strongest global military after the United States. Before its invasion of Ukraine, Russia claimed nearly 1 million personnel, 1,500 combat aircraft, 7,600 pieces of artillery, and the largest tank force of any army in the world at 12,400 units. Russia was a formidable force, on paper at least. Following its failure to reach Kyiv in the first few weeks of the war, many Western analysts have come to doubt that Russia's military was ever as strong as it claimed to be.
Eventually, President Putin, Russia, will realize the full extent of their strategic miscalculation.
Outside of Moscow, little is known about the current size of Russia's arsenal. But what it's brought out on the battlefield has been largely cataloged by investigative journalists. Dutch researchers from the outlet Oryx have documented that Russia has lost at least 69 aircraft, 560 artillery pieces, and 1,600 tanks. The U.S. military, however, claims that Russia may have lost as much as half of its tanks so far. Some analysts point to Russia's use in Ukraine of the T-62 tank as evidence that its armory is in dire straits. The T-62 is a relic, introduced while the Berlin Wall was under construction. This photo is from a Russian museum of military history. Ukraine's government has also claimed that Moscow will eventually run out of long-range missiles, saying Russian factories cannot replenish the stockpiles. Yet their estimates from November were proven too optimistic when Russia stepped up its long-range bombing campaign in the last weeks of 2022. Building a bomb takes longer than dropping one. But the Kremlin says weapons factories are working overtime, quite literally, to supply its invading forces. Putin recently visited an arms manufacturer, praising the workers.
All this can only inspire confidence that victory will be ours.
For Ukraine's part, with so many of its factories and depots destroyed, its best chance to counter Russia's military might is to keep supplies flowing from its international partners.
Well, American diplomat William Courtney is a former ambassador and an adjunct senior fellow at the Rand Corporation think tank. I asked him earlier how strong the Russian military remains nearly a year after its invasion of Ukraine.
The Russian military is probably only a fraction of what strength it had at the beginning, because so many of its top soldiers were killed in the failed invasion attempt last February or March. Those folks were going after Kyiv, for example, the capital, and Kharkiv, both of which the Russian forces failed to seize. So now Russia's relying on less capable forces.
Russia is reportedly talking about mobilising another 500,000 soldiers. How far do you think these new tank commitments from the West can go toward countering any fresh Russian offensive?
The West will be sure that Ukraine retains a qualitative edge but Russia is likely to have a quantitative edge if it succeeds in mobilizing so many more soldiers. Those soldiers would be less well equipped, less well trained, but there would be a large number of them. So there would be an offsetting capability there. Thus far, though, the first mobilization was so unpopular in Russia, one wonders whether the Kremlin will undertake another mobilization of that scale, and if it does, whether there could be risks to the Kremlin's role.
Mr. Courtney, we hear a lot that any problem the Russian military has, the generals will throw more and more soldiers at that problem. Is that a reasonable assessment?
That was its strategy in World War II, for example. The Soviets lost 500,000 troops in the Battle of Berlin at the end of the war, for example. So Russia is likely to continue that strategy, except that there's been more freedom than there was in the Soviet period now. And so it's possible that public unrest could surge if more of these folks are recruited into an army in which they're not being trained well and not being equipped well.
Russia has called the Western tanks for Kyiv a blatant provocation. What sort of retaliation, if any, do you think can be expected?
I don't think there'll be any serious retaliation. In the past, when Russia has suffered setbacks, whether failing to take Kyiv, failing to take Kharkiv, the Ukrainians sank the Moskva, the flagship of the Russian Black Sea fleet, the Ukrainians seized the rest of Kharkiv Oblast recently. Each time, there really hasn't been a blowback. Now, when the Ukrainians attacked the Kerch Bridge, going from southern Russia to Crimea, the Russians launched more attacks on civilian infrastructure. But that's a sign of weakness. In fact, the attacks today, another sign of weakness. If you want to gain military advantage, you attack military targets.
Will these better tanks really pose such a problem for Russia? They've elicited such a strong reaction from Moscow, but will it really be such a problem for Russia on the battlefield to counter this better and newer equipment from the West?
So these tanks are more capable. They can shoot at longer ranges than the Russian tanks. They can shoot when they're moving as well, and they can shoot accurately. So they will be capable. But the Ukrainians also have a lot of former Soviet tanks, some of which, many of which, were taken from Russia as its forces surrendered. So a mix of the modern Western tanks and the former Soviet tanks should give Ukraine a potent force for a counteroffensive operation. That requires combined arms, infantry, artillery, armor, and aviation. And that's what the West is now training Ukrainian forces to do in Germany.
Now that these cards are on the table, finally, do you see a risk that this conflict could escalate to directly involve NATO members?
Thus far, Russia has been very careful not to strike targets in Ukraine that are on the border with NATO allies. And Ukraine has a border with 4 NATO allies. So this kind of suggests that the Kremlin is wary of provoking NATO.
William Courtney, thank you very much, Senior Fellow at the RAND Corporation. Thanks for your time.
You're quite welcome.